Hello and welcome to another wonderful, gorgeous episode of the Fully Charged podcast. Very short introduction. I just want to mention, in case you've come across this podcast and you don't know about the Fully Charged show, today's guest has presented literally dozens of episodes for us from China. Elliot Richards joins us today on the podcast, and it's always a joy to speak to him. And it's one of those weird things where I feel I know Elliot really well because we've talked so many times, but I've never actually met him in the real world. It's all from talking online. Obviously, he's been locked up in his apartment for quite a long time recently. He does mention that in the podcast, and it's clearly quite a contentious time in China at the moment, particularly in Shanghai, where he lives with his wife and gorgeous baby son. And so it's all a little bit difficult, and I steer off plenty of topics very deliberately. So there may be areas that you think we should cover when featuring China, which is perfectly legitimate, but I'm afraid I'm not prepared to do it to endanger Elliot in any way. He's such an incredible advantage for the Fully Charged show to have someone on the ground in China looking at amazing cars. Just scroll back through the Fully Charged show's episodes and you'll find a lot of stuff. Then some of which, he'll do a review of a car and like 2 years later, it'll be on the streets in Europe or some less so in the United States. But certainly here, we're getting them a lot. So it's really good to talk to him. I just want to quickly mention our live shows that are coming. The first one, and this is very relevant because of Elliot. Fingers crossed here. The first live show will be on March the 11th and 12th, 2023 in Sydney, Australia, at the Sydney Exhibition Centre. And Elliot is joining us, which is fantastic news. I'm so pleased that he's gonna make it down there. So we're really looking forward to meeting lots of people in Australia and having a great time that weekend. The shows are always way more amazing than I always think. I've always been the skeptic when it comes to the live shows, and I've always been wrong. The most recent we did at San Diego, where I was going, no one's going to come, it's going to be awful, oh no, we don't understand the American market, and it was packed out. It was fantastic. So I'm going to shut up from now on. Sydney's going to be amazing. We've got lots of guests from Australia on the show soon, and we've also got lots of reports from Australia of all the amazing things that are happening, because it's really changing there very rapidly. But before we do that, let's catch up with what's happening in China. So please welcome to the Fully Charged podcast, Elliot Richards. Let's talk about BYD.
Let's talk about BYD. I like BYD.
Yes, that's why. So I should explain to the audience that there's a part of my Australian family. There is now a BYD Atto 3 that I'm allowed to go and have a look at and have a drive at when I get to Australia. So I haven't done it, but yeah. So I'm glad you reminded me of that. So when we did when you did an episode about it, it was the BYD. What was it called? Sorry, you did Yuan. Yeah. But it's good though. So you like that?
Yeah, I mean it's a really good just all-rounder car. It doesn't get, a lot of EVs have got to grab headlines by having like screens which spin round or
fancy nonsense.
Lots of features you don't really need. Yeah. Whereas the BYD is just a normal car for normal people. It's not too expensive. It's got decent range. It's not going to blow you away with 0 to 60 times. It's just a good all-round car. And there's so few EVs like that now. Yeah. I think you drove the, what's it called?
The Aura Funky Cat.
Yes. Which is good, right?
Yeah, it's a great little car. Really straightforward. I mean, the big pluses for that, and even with my rubbish old eyesight, the screens were so kind of super crystal sharp clear. That was a really nice thing. So there's only a little monitor, a little dash screen in front of you, and the screen inside. And what I loved about it is when I can use software in a car intuitively, I think it shows it's really good. I didn't have to be shown a lot of stuff. It worked really well. The sat navs, all those things were great in that car. No, I really loved that car. I've seen some. It's interesting when you read the comments. Aside from the sort of obvious political ones, which we don't get that many of, but there's a few, But that was from people like who were sort of concerned about the quality of the longevity of the vehicle. So there's no wheel arch protection, which I must admit I didn't notice. And I went, oh dear, how terrible. But then what it means is it's more likely to get corrosion in the wheel arches than if you do have wheel arch protection, which lots of modern cars do. Okay. And it's things like that, and you go, oh goodness. Which is one of the reasons why I'm glad that you and Jack are doing most of our car reviews and not me. Because I'll just sit there and go, oh, it's quite nice.
Well, I think, but that's it though. Could you imagine, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago saying, I'm driving a car from China, which is, it can match anything
really
from
well made.
The UK, Europe or the US.
Yeah.
All right, it needs wheel arch liners or whatever, but that's a fairly easy fix.
And it's also possible that wherever that person was, because they weren't in the UK or Europe, I can't remember, they might. I've got a feeling it was Indonesia or somewhere, that the ones that are sold there don't have wheel arch. Because I've got a feeling they do. I think the ones in the UK did. I think it did have them. I think I would have noticed that, because I did never go poke round it. But anyway.
Yeah. And, so that, the BYD is very similar to that.
Yeah.
I think extremely practical. It's just a great car.
Yeah.
I mean, can't really complain. I think, we actually ordered a BYD in January this year, the Dolphin. We ordered one as a little runaround, but we were waiting for 6 months and it didn't get delivered, so we cancelled the order. But
oh God, because I sort of, but I kind of think of that's what's happening here all the time. If you want an Audi e-tron, it's like 18 months wait. Which is just like, well, why bother? But I assume that wasn't happening in China, but it is. So there are delays then in manufacturing.
But it's for BYD, it's more delays because they've got so many orders.
Oh, right.
Because they are producing something like over 200,000 cars per month.
Wow. God.
And the delay is 6 months at that production rate.
So they've got millions of orders then. Yeah,
they do. So that's half of that is EVs and half of that is PHEVs.
Right.
So they still split. They don't do any fully ICE cars anymore. Right. But they just announced, I think, a few weeks ago that they've sold 3 million EVs and PHEVs since inception.
Right.
And I think earlier this year it was at 2 million.
Right.
So they've done a million in less than a year, I think. And we're expecting them to hit 4 million early next year.
Right. Wow.
So they're And
would you
every car you order from them is at least 6 months.
Right. But would you say they're the biggest electric vehicle manufacturers, or because Great Wall, is it Great Wall Motors that make the Aura Cat?
That's Great Wall. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they seem, when I looked at their stats, they was pretty chunky. I mean, they're not sitting around doing nothing. They're churning out a lot of cars.
No, but I think BYD is selling the most EVs.
Right.
So BYD would be first.
Right.
100,000 a month, soon adds up. And that's only going to increase over the next, few months. You see BYDs everywhere. Maybe less so in Shanghai, where people are driving more Teslas.
Right.
Maybe more Neos because of the brand and money. But as soon as you leave Shanghai, if I go to my wife's hometown, every single car is a BYD.
Right. Wow, isn't that amazing?
BYD, everywhere. Wow. It's really very noticeable. And this is my wife's hometown's 4 hours from Shanghai. It's on the coast. It's relatively wealthy.
Right.
A few years ago, everyone was driving imported BMW petrol cars, Mercedes petrol cars because of the brand image, everything like that. Now, almost everyone is driving electric.
Right.
And they're driving many, many more domestic cars.
Right.
So there's been a huge shift.
Wow.
In the last kind of couple of years. It's incredible.
And I mean, is there a discussion? I mean, the two things I want to ask you about in those terms, is there a discussion generally or specifically about the grid coping with the increase in demand from charging cars, and two, with the materials? Let's do the grid first, but the other one is the materials availability, which is, a constant topic here. And it's actually not based on actual problems. When you talk to people who work in the minerals sector, they know, well, no, there's no shortage. It's loads of it, but we just haven't dug it up. It's not, but in terms of charging, because that's the other one, is we're going to melt the grid in the UK once we have all these fancy electric cars. And I'm just wondering how the Chinese are dealing with that.
It's not even a topic of discussion because the rollout of chargers has been incredible. So there's fast chargers everywhere. They're not perfect. On the motorways, they do break down. We've seen a few broken down ones, and they do get full up quite quickly.
Yeah.
But in terms of overloading the grid, absolutely no way. I don't think that's ever come up in discussion. It's like, it's China. We've got power from hydro, from wind, unfortunately from coal as well, which we'll come on to later. But it's not even a discussion at all. It's just like, here's a EV. Do you want to buy it? Okay. Here's a free number plate.
Right.
You can drive it. And even, I think over 50% of people live in apartments, so they don't have a parking space.
Yeah.
Even then, it's still not an issue.
Right. No, because you've explained that before. But I mean, that is what is also intriguing is, and I wonder if this has any bearing on it, that I'm assuming like the national grid and then many times the local grid is much newer than it would be in the UK. I mean, I know that our house was our village that I live in was one of the very late connections to the grid. It didn't have electricity until about it was after the war. So about 1953, I think, is when our grid was put in. So that is quite old. And our grid was built between the wars. That our national grid was effectively installed in the 1920s and 30s. That's when it was kind of across the country. So it's quite old, whereas I'd imagine a huge amount of electrical infrastructure in China is in the last 20 to 30 years, I'm assuming. I mean...
Yeah, easily. And even the older grid where, say, take, for example, my wife's parents' house, it's seen as quite an old building. I think it was built in 1998.
And that's old. That's old. We've got this lovely old traditional house built in 1998. Wow. 1998.
Okay. But cities have expanded so much since then. Even now, there's still construction everywhere,
right.
And they're much more conscious of if you build a new build, whatever it is, shopping mall, school, housing complex, you have to have the grid connections for the chargers, and it's not just one or two token chargers. Yeah. It's every parking space.
Right.
So it's, they're planning well in advance. Yeah. And so the grid, there's no problems with the grid at all.
Right.
As far as I know.
No, I think you would hear about it. But I mean, what's interesting is that shift. If you went back, say, just 10 years, go back 10 years, the amount of electric cars on the road in China would be a very, very low percentage, probably less than 1%. And if you go and that would have meant a few thousand cars. Now there are, I'm assuming, some millions of electric cars that charge. So that you just think, well, that's got to have two big impacts. One, less fuel being sold, less liquid fuel, and then a lot more electricity. So it's a big shift. It's an interesting place to see it. I know it's not a problem in Norway, which has a sort of equivalent scale of electric cars, many from China. No, they're very popular there.
Everyone from China.
I know. It's bonkers, isn't it? But that's cool. But then the other one is the materials stuff, because that's a really hot topic here at the moment in Europe. Is where all your fancy materials. I mean, on the silly level, where all your fancy materials come from. On the realistic, actual minerals extraction, it is how do we ramp up this industry fast enough? It's still lagging in terms of kind of global access to the, from what I understand it, we're not going to run out of lithium, which is a favourite ridiculous story. There's plenty of it, but it's but it's the nickel and copper and cobalt and all those other ones. There is huge demand for that stuff. But then China's been quite clever at securing those supplies.
Yeah. I mean, they've invested in countries which have the supply. So there's a lot of obviously Chinese investment in Africa, where some of the mines are. They've secured the supply chain, because I don't know how many battery factories are in China, but almost all of them are in China.
That's the best way of describing it.
So it's like, if you're in the domestic market, it's like, no, we've got batteries for you guys, don't worry.
Right.
But if exporting, maybe not. You know, we'll maybe restrict supply to some other countries.
Yeah.
You know, it's definitely a interesting time because, you know, China just again dominates that industry. You know, battery technology, battery supplies, it's all focused on China, and you know, places like the UK can't even get a factory off the ground at the moment. Right? We're really struggling, and you know, I think CATL, which is the biggest battery supplier, they're going to build a factory in Europe, I think.
Right.
Or they've built a factory in Europe, I think in Hungary.
Yeah, I think there is one in
Hungary.
But
there's no discussion here. When you buy an electric car, there's no minerals or...
Right.
It's just like, oh, we've got another electric car, let's buy it.
Right. God,
that is... You know, we're getting to the point now where people are getting their second electric car. So they've had their first one maybe for 2 or 3 years. Right. So I've had mine now for my Xpeng for 3 years.
Yes, you must. Yeah, I was going to say it's been a while. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years now. And
presumably you've had to throw the battery away twice by now. I'm just going on the YouTube comments I get.
Oh yeah. The battery's useless. You have to replace it at least 3 times.
I think we should just caveat that and go, that's a joke. Just because
that's a joke.
There'll be someone who'll... Yeah, anyway.
But interestingly, because you know, we have the what is it, MG5, the electric estate car here in MG5, China. Yeah. The tax in Shanghai is the taxi.
Oh wow! Because they're really common here. They're being really popular here. The MG5, yeah.
Yeah, and they're great cars. Yeah. I mean, they're a little boring, but that's good. Yeah. They don't need to be fancy. But every time I get into a taxi, I check to see how many kilometers those cars have done. Right. Because they're full on driving.
And they're running
so they have
all
2
the time.
Shifts.
Yeah.
Yeah, day driver and a night driver. So they're only fast charging. You know, they're on the road 24 hours a day, apart from when they're charging. And I've been in some of those they've only been on the road here, 18 months?
Yeah.
Some of those have over 350,000 kilometers on the battery.
Wow.
Same battery.
Wow.
And they're fast charging, very little degradation.
Yeah.
And I think, gosh, if that can do that, fast charging, you know, on a fairly standard sedan, it hasn't any fancy battery technology. It's, you know, it's very normal.
Yeah.
You know, batteries are not going to be an issue, I don't think.
I mean, is because 350,000 K if that was a private car and you drove it on the average amount, that's like 10 years, isn't it? I mean, it's a long time, you know, to rack that up. Because I always remember that story. It was a couple of years ago when the first 1 million mile Tesla passed the 1 million mile. That was 1 million miles, not kilometers. And then you saw the list of what had been done to that car in the time they'd had it, and it was new front axle, 3 new motors, new whole steering assembly, rear axle, suspension, and then right at the end, it was battery. You know, the battery outlasted the whole of the rest of the car, and the photographs of the car, it was knackered. It was sort of sagging. It was so broken, but the battery was still going. You know, and that is, I think we get what we will see. I mean, that's the 2 most recent discussions I've had about batteries is forget about it's the car is going to fall to bits, and then you'll go, well, let's put this battery in a new car because the battery's fine. Yeah, I think we've reached that. Yeah. We're reaching that point now, definitely. Yeah,
I think so.
Because I think that is that thing is my Nissan Leaf from 2010. The battery pack on that was a disaster from the day it was made.
Yeah,
and that is the story that people think, oh, they're all like that, and you go, well, they're not actually. But on the other hand, my daughter drives that car all the time. She's clocked up 10,000 miles in my Nissan Leaf in a few months. You know, she's driving. She uses it for work, and she is fine with it, and she pushes it. Because it's now got the new, you know, we did replace the battery, but she goes, I got it down to, it said a mile, then it said it was going to run out, and I drove it another 30 miles, but I had to be really careful. I was going, don't do that. Terrifying.
But I mean, even since then, I think the biggest downfall to that battery was it was air cooled, wasn't it? It was liquid cooled.
It was like, if you drove fast through cold air, it would be cooler. Yeah, it had no temperature management of any sort. No, it was, however, and I think it was more affected by very hot weather. So I remember hearing from someone who'd parked their car on a black car park, you know, a tarmacked car park in Nevada, And then they measured the temperature of the battery, and it was like you'd boil a kettle on it in a couple of minutes. I mean, it was incredibly hot. And then their range fell off a cliff at that point. So
yeah. But I mean, it's changed a lot, and I think even with the new technologies coming out, there's different battery chemistries, all far beyond what I understand, but it gives you more range and performs better in colder weather. So that's what most people care about.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen, isn't it? Whatever happens, whatever else happens, that'll happen. That's sort of in the mix. But then the other one you mentioned, there's a new BYD that I had heard of, but I can't remember. Not the Dolphin. There's another one.
No, it's still part of their sea range. So they've got this, ocean range. They've got this. I don't really understand why it's an ocean-themed range of cars, but anyway, Seal is the new one, the BYD Seal, and apart from the unfortunate name, it's their kind of new kind of sporty sedan, and we drove it I think a couple of weeks ago. I think the video should be coming out this week. I think.
Oh right, good.
On the channel. We did a test of it, and it's just, oh my God. I mean, BYD, as we both know, BYD a few years ago were pretty clunky and a bit awful in the design department. Yeah. The Dolphin was great, the small car. We loved that. Still a bit awkward in design, and this is like a mini Porsche Taycan. It's about £25,000. It's got very good design. It's very well built, great size. Everything about that car is fantastic. BYD have come of age. They've matured, and now they can make, because I say this in my review, a spoiler alert, but they're a very good technology and engineering company. Yeah. They are probably one of the biggest battery experts in the world. Tech experts. They know what they're doing, but the design and the aesthetics and the brand was always lacking. Yeah. But that's changed now. With the Seal, it's just the whole package is fantastic. I struggling to think of a bad word to say about that car, but it was we got to drive it around Shenzhen. It's just brilliant. Yeah. Just fantastic. Really just an amazing car, and it just shows you that BYD have developed so quickly, and they're still developing, that they can bring out cars like this, which are attractive and have the latest tech. But they BYD go into nerdy detail. Another spoiler alert, but they had most press releases you get are 1 or 2 pages full of flowery language about the drive, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, fine. This was 14 pages of engineering details.
Fantastic.
Oh, well, we've reduced the silicon in the motor, which gives it 3% more efficiency. And we've reduced the chassis rigidity by da-da-da-da. And it's like, oh, okay, this is fantastic. You wouldn't see that in many other press releases. So they're still very much focused on engineering, but it's like the cool engineering. And I think this car is like, they've hit the nail on the head with this one. It's fantastic. Oh, wow. Can't say a bad word about it.
Great stuff. Oh, God, I'm looking forward to seeing that. Because then the other thing that I thought of this morning when I was driving down to the office was the hundreds, if not, the many hundreds of electric car companies that I haven't even heard of that exist. And I mean, I'm sure in the fullness of time, they won't all exist, say, in 25 years' time. Some of them are definitely going to get absorbed or disappear. But is that still, are you still aware? I mean, do you see now, like you're walking down the street to get a tea bag or something, and you go, oh my God, I've not seen one of those before, like some more obscure make of electric vehicle in China, or are they not that common? Because they must all be, if they're all making cars, there's something like 400 different companies, or are there? I don't know. I mean, that's what I remember hearing.
Yeah. In Shanghai, less so because of, Shanghai people like to buy expensive SUVs. Right. But if you go outside of Shanghai, you see cars by companies which make TVs. There's a TV company called Skyworth. And they make this SUV. And I'm like, wow, why are you making an electric car? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Or you see this new microcar, you think, oh, that looks so cool. Right. And you look it up and it's £3,000 or £4,000. Wow. And there's still a lot of surprises out there, especially outside of Shanghai. Right. you know, it's gonna, obviously they're gonna start, you know, folding and consolidating, but at the moment it's like the wild west of electric cars. It's like, oh, I've got a factory, I can make some electric cars, and the government's like, go on then,
right?
Here's some subsidies, off you go.
Wow, yeah,
survival of the fittest, and then some of them, you know, import them overseas,
right?
Some of them are huge sales successes, like the Wuling Mini, you know, EV. Yeah, it was surprise success. That
such a tiny little car,
£3,000 car, which everyone's now copying.
Right,
everyone has a car like that now.
Right,
but yeah, it's still very much surprise on every corner.
Yes, yeah. That is so extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, it's also the fact that it is you know, there's been such a long history in the world in general of really big, huge, monolithic, established car brands. And then there have been, I mean, I can't remember who they all are now, but there have been attempts in the last sort of 100 years to launch a new car. And this is nothing to do with electric cars, you know, and they always failed. They always failed. And I mean, from our knowledge in the rest of the world outside China, Tesla was this remarkable exception to that they were a startup.
That's right.
Everyone, I saw someone had put together video clips on a YouTube thing the other day of all the people saying it'll never work. And it wasn't necessarily just people who hate Musk or hate electric cars. Some of them were quite sad. They said, I would love this company to work, but they don't have a chance. And this is like in 2010, 12, that time. They're never going to, it's never going to work. No one's going to buy these cars. You know, and all that stuff. And you look at it now and you go, oh my God, for all the other madness, you probably missed the Twitter madness with Musk and Twitter.
No, unfortunately not.
Oh, God. Yeah, anyway, I certainly don't want to talk about that because that is just too tedious.
No, let's not go there.
Yeah. But, you know, and Tesla's stock price has fallen off a shelf, hasn't it, into the wastebasket. But they're still producing millions of cars. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yes, with one caveat. I think I mentioned this, that Tesla's actually started discounting their cars here in China.
Yeah, you did mention that to me. Yeah.
So, you know, there's rumors of softening demand.
Right.
You know, they still need to keep up their sales numbers to, you know, still be the biggest EV car company in the world, right? And to keep investors happy, et cetera, et cetera. So they've actually reduced the Model 3 and the Model Y price here in China.
Wow.
They're the ones which are produced in the Shanghai Gigafactory.
Yeah.
And they did that, I think, a month ago.
Right.
And there's already rumors again that they're going to reduce it one more time.
Wow.
So, and that if they reduce it anymore, I think a Model 3 now is about, and you won't like me for this, I think it's about £23,000 for a Model 3.
You're kidding? That is amazing. That is ridiculous.
It used to be about 26. It's gone down to about 21, 22 grand.
Because they're about 40 here. They're around the high 30s, early 40s for a Model 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Isn't that amazing? Because, I mean, if it's possible, let's just imagine that it is possible for Tesla to make that car and sell it for that much money and not, like, lose $10,000 doing it.
Yeah,
either breaking even or making a little bit of money selling it. You know, that is amazing. The markup and the amount of suits that you're paying for between the manufacturer when the guy drives it off the production line and when you get it.
Exactly,
it's just some very big rakes around the world going, we'll have some of that. Yeah,
that's why you can spend 44 billion and buy Twitter. But let's not go there.
No, let's not go there. Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interest around how Tesla's going to do, because Model 3 is, how old is the Model 3? 3 or 4 years old now?
Yeah, it's got to be 4 plus. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was released,
you know, the speed things happen in China is, you know, a model is out of date within 18 months to 2 years. Right. You need a new model.
Wow.
If you don't have a new model, sales will fall off the cliff and, you know, you'll lose all those customers. So Tesla's got a real battle in front of it to keep relevant and up to date.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to have a very challenging 2023.
Right. That's interesting. Wow. And I mean, I would also say whatever's happening now, we know what happens in China. Used to be what happens in America happens to us next, but now I think it's what happens in China. In terms of electric cars, you know, you're so far ahead in so many ways. And I mean, because I remember you saying before that it was the brand was incredibly popular in China once they set up the Gigafactory, and so you see a lot of them on the streets in Shanghai, for instance.
You can't turn a corner without seeing another Tesla. It's I don't know how to compare it, but I think I counted in my compound there's about 15 Teslas. There's only about 60 cars in total. 15 of them are Teslas.
Right. Yeah.
So they're very popular in Shanghai.
Right. Well, that is interesting that they're losing that, or they might be losing that sheen.
Yeah, I mean, there's and there's obviously news stories about, I don't know, problems with quality and accidents and all sorts and stuff. So there's always this thing about it's an American company. We should be supporting the domestic market a bit more. So Tesla's going to have an interesting 18 months ahead of it, I think, to see what happens. And there's still rumors persisting about the smaller car, the Tesla Model 1 or Model 2.
Yes.
Designed in Shanghai, for the Chinese market primarily.
Right.
Maybe we'll hear about that later this year or early next year. But if they made a smaller car, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
We need more smaller cars and less SUVs.
Yeah. Oh, God. So do we ever? I mean, there might be extreme limits, like the Wuling Mini EV. But it does look like it does look like you've just climbed into the box that your fridge was delivered in.
Yes,
there's an element of that. But you've cut realistic windows out of the front and the side.
Yeah, exactly.
It is such an extraordinary tiny, but it makes so much more sense if you're driving in a city. If you're going to drive in a city and because that,
absolutely.
I mean, it is a boring cliche, but that I repeated that list the other day, and someone said it's a really good list. I'd never thought of it before, but my list is walk, cycle, public transport, train, car. The ideal list: car share, private car, then fly. That's how it should, how can I get from A to B? Well, B is only just down the road. I'll walk. Or B's a bit further, I'll cycle. Or I've got to carry a big lot of shopping. Okay, I'll get on public transport. All that stuff is kind of, if you're in a city, I think that is the way it should go. And if you're going to have a car, and I want in a city, I want a little one that I can put. When I've test driven things like the Fiat 500e, and I've driven there in a Tesla Model S to do the test, which happened a few years ago, and I couldn't get the Tesla Model S through the gate of the place where we were parking the car because it was like steering a ship into a, and then you get in the Fiat 500. It was so easy, and I parked it, and it was just a joy. Yeah, we've driven like the big Neos, and all these other massive SUVs, and I get so stressed out driving it in Shanghai because the streets, in the center of Shanghai, it was based, is a very old city,
old city with old, London plane trees on both sides. It's beautiful, but they're narrow streets, and you've got cycle lanes on both sides, which is great.
Yeah,
like proper cycle lanes. And so you're actually driving this massive tank, and then you try and park, and there's trees everywhere, and there's people cycling past. You think, oh gosh, this is too much. I can't deal with this.
Yeah.
With the Wuling, you literally just whip it in there, and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So they preaching to the converted here, but they just make so much more sense.
Yeah.
Right?
But the other topic I'd love to cover with you, and I think I did mention it when we were arranging this, but is about the stats of sort of, because I just want to counter the story of, China burns loads of coal, and I know they do, but they've also put in. That one headline, it was in Bloomberg, so it was in a Western publication about hitting the 2030 renewable target by 2025, i.e. they've got further ahead. And it was there was one statistic I remember, which was, I think it was in 2020, the global installation of solar panels doubled in 1 year. So everything we'd ever put in anywhere on any roof, solar farm, anything, in 2019 was doubled in a year, and it was 100% of that was in China. You go, my God, that is... it was terawatt. It was terawatts of electricity generation. Yes. So, but I mean, because you're presumably in a city, you're not going to be seeing that firsthand. It's not going to be obvious to you. But if you were to drive, I don't know, a long distance to somewhere, I don't know where. I need my map out to have a look. But would you see you'd see evidence of renewables outside cities.
Oh, very much so. And I think, just outside Shanghai, there's a lot of, China's a coastal country on the side I'm on, right? Lots of coastal cities. There's 18,000 kilometers of coastline, in fact.
Right.
So there's a lot of actual offshore wind. When I used to fly home, 3 or 4 years ago, you used to see it flying out of the city in the sea. So there's a lot of offshore wind. There's quite a lot of onshore wind as well.
Right.
Solar, I haven't seen so much of in terms of big solar projects, but you do see on people's houses, they've got these solar water heaters.
Yeah.
It's just a cheaper way to heat your water at home.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really fascinating topic. I did a bit of research into it, and I'm boggled by the figures as per usual.
Yeah.
But there's a really interesting quote which I love because it kind of sums it all up. It says, "The Yellow River flows into the sea, but it twists and turns on the way," which means whatever happens, the path towards the goal is unstoppable. So this path towards renewables, yes, we're burning coal now. It's not great.
Yeah.
Coal output this year is probably the highest it's ever been.
Right.
We hit record highs, I think, last year with coal output, 4 billion tons. Not great.
Yeah.
But like it says, we're heading, China's heading towards, being carbon neutral by 2060. Now, if they smash the peak emissions target 5 years early, then they're going to hit that carbon neutrality target 10 probably years early. They're saying emissions will peak in 2025. We live in such an interconnected world, right?
Yeah.
Even with COVID and what's happening now, the global economic recovery after COVID couldn't have been done without China and China's heavy industries. Steel and cement is, a huge part of the CO2 output.
Yeah.
And for the world to recover, China needed to ramp up as well. So in early 2021, there was a 16% increase in electricity demand to cope with that.
Right. And that was to cope with manufacturing, not charging electric cars. I think it's important to just to put that little reminder in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just general manufacturing.
Yeah.
And how do you increase by 16.5%, the electricity demand? There's not that much nuclear. You can't just build a nuclear plant.
No.
They've got a lot of coal, so they burnt more coal.
Yeah.
And so, but the interesting thing is, they've actually grown in renewables massively in the same time.
Right.
And so there's 5 state-owned power firms in China.
Wow.
And they've said to the national government, they said, all our profit comes from renewables. We don't want to invest in any more coal.
Wow. That is fascinating. Wow.
Yeah. And they're the monopolies. They're monopolies, right, in China. And they've said, no, stop it. We don't want any more coal.
Right.
The push for coal comes from local government. So, a small regional government who says, no, we've got a goal to produce X number of tons of steel. We need the capacity to build this. But what's happening now is they're building these coal stations, which are never going to make a profit.
Right.
As soon as they're built, they're not making a profit. They're only running for about 3,000 hours per year, which is way below what's needed to make a profit.
Right.
So going back to that quote, it doesn't matter if they build more coal power stations now. They're not actually going to be used that much over the next few years. And by 2030, 2035, they're going to be redundant. Yeah. Wow. And there's been such we've all seen the push for renewables, right? So I think, capacity for renewables went past 1,000 gigawatts in 2021.
Right. Yes, it did. Yes, I did see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was 1,002. Oh, no, that was global. It was 1,002 terawatts was the global. That was a global figure, not a Chinese figure. Yeah. But I love the fact that it was 1,002. So I don't know why.
So specific.
Do you really need to count the two? I suppose 2 terawatts is a lot.
Roll it over to next year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way that they're trying to hit their targets is basically just through wind and solar. So, you know, China has a lot of hydro, has quite a lot of nuclear. They're building a lot of nuclear plants.
Right.
But the quickest way to reach their targets is wind and solar.
Yeah.
And the problem for China is it's not the speed of construction. That's no problem. They can absolutely do as much as they can, as quickly as they can. The issue is what we spoke about earlier is the grid.
Yeah.
So the grid is not ready to, you know, cope with those wind and solar installations.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest blocker at the moment. So they can install terawatts of power, no, in a year.
Yeah.
But the grid's not quite ready yet.
To absorb that, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's all those things that, I mean, one of the other things is which I just did I've written a thing, we haven't recorded it yet, but I will do soon, which is about it's about the reliability. This is an International Energy Authority, IEA report, about the reliability and the amount of hours per year. Because that's what reminded me of it when you mentioned that amount of hours per year that different power sources are producing. And renewables is on top for all except for nuclear. But when nuclear has to be, like a nuclear power plant has to have maintenance work done on it, it's not offline for like an afternoon or a weekend. It's 2 years they have to turn it off. You know, it's like, oh my God, because they've got to rebuild the whole thing, you know, because it's so complicated. And all the coal plants, you know, when they go wrong for months at a time. I mean, I'm very aware of this from Australia because they've had real problems with some of their old coal plants. Just, you know, the pipes start leaking, you know, the high pressure pipes that turn the generators, and you can't have that. So, you know, it's not that they're not going to blow up or explode or anything. They're just worn out. They're knackered. They're under enormous pressure and heat for years, and that wears them out. And wind turbines just carry on, and solar panels just carry on. They're much more reliable, and that's exactly the opposite of what everyone, you know, we can't rely on unreliable sources. Well, they're more reliable than we've been relying on for the last 100 years.
Exactly.
It's so weird.
I think the biggest issue for China is, you know, there's no large scale storage. It's not just China. But, you know, when there's a lot of wind or a lot of sun, you know, where do they store that power? You know, the winter here, it can be quite grey and overcast and grim and miserable. So, you know, I think they need to find a way that doesn't have coal as the backup, because coal is the backup now, right? Because it's easily available. You know, there's plenty of mines, you know, plenty of people mining. Right. It's cheap. It's within China. They don't have to import it. So it gives them energy security. But I think, you know, they know it's finite. Yeah. It's going to run out. They know it's not good. Yeah. They know they have to hit the target. So we're going to see perhaps a ramp up of coal before 2025, maybe this year, next year, who knows? But then very, very rapidly after 2025, it's going to start disappearing. Yeah. And probably by 2035, there'll be very, very few coal stations left.
Yes. Yeah. Because I was quite upset that one of the projects we're going to go and see, we were going to go before Christmas, we can't now, we've got to wait till early next year, is like the biggest wind turbine in the world. And as soon as I saw that, I was going, oh, yeah, because the Danes and the British have done the biggest wind turbine in the world. 2 days later, I read, oh no, there's another one that's just been put up in China that's much bigger. It's hugely bigger. It's like, oh my God, that's so vast. I can't remember any of the stats, but it's terrifying how an offshore wind turbine, but it's huge.
Yeah, it's offshore wind turbine just off Shanghai. I think it's something like 245 meters diameter of the blades going round, something ridiculous, and it's the height of a 50-story building.
Yes, yeah, it's a monster. Yeah.
For each turn of the turbine, it produces 33 kilowatt hours. So it would charge my car in 2 turns, fully charged.
Oh no, it'd be more than 33 kilowatt hours. It would be one rotation. Oh, I'm not sure now. Yes, maybe you're right. Maybe it's one rotation would charge your car. Yeah. I would say it's probably more than that. I mean, I'm just trying to think of what the scale of those things, because they're, I think, 14 megawatts, the actual turbine is. Yeah, that's the maximum it can produce, which is, we're looking at, I think the one we're looking at is 12 megawatts, which sounds quite big, but of course the Chinese have got to be, it's all about,
even bigger.
It's like the Americans in the 1950s. Our cars are bigger! You know? It's now the Chinese with their big wind turbines.
Or those rest stops in America where it's like the biggest lobster in the world.
Oh yeah,
Have you seen those ones?
Yeah. Well, they have those in
the biggest lobster in America.
Yeah, they have those in Australia as well. My wife and I generally visit the big pineapple whenever we're in Queensland.
Oh, okay.
It's a giant pineapple. You can see it from miles away.
Oh gosh.
And it's on a pineapple farm. But then you stop and it's exactly as you'd expect. It's a bit cheesy, but the pineapples are amazing because they were basically they're warm because they were growing in the sun that morning, and they're so delicious. They're just off the scale. Yeah,
fresh.
Yeah, really fresh. Yeah, 10 minutes. They're 10 minutes old. Yeah, but yeah. I mean, I think that's the fascinating thing, and I tried to explain this in a recent episode, when I did the Aura Funky Cap, the kind of history of why everything's made in China. You know, it's like, did they come over and steal our factories in the 1980s? No. We actively, consciously, openly, publicly sent all our manufacturing from Europe and North America to China as quick as we could. Reagan and Thatcher, that was their big thing. And it was a brilliant thing in a way. At the time, it opened China up. We kind of suddenly knew what was happening in China much more than we had done for the previous 30 or 40 years. But that's what, because I think now if you're, younger than you, so like Jesse's age, our editor, that's his whole life's been like everything was made in China his entire life. But I can remember before when I went to them. You could go to a factory in England that made things like fridges and TVs and cars, and you can't do that now. You can go to an old factory that's been turned into an arts warehouse.
Yeah, it's globalization, right? It's people wanted to make more profit in their own pockets to buy another Ferrari or something, and then that's what happens. Yeah. And
but I think it's certainly kind of, I don't know if it's come back to bite us in the West, but it's certainly, I think people are suddenly very aware. When you
I mean it's repeating a pattern from Japan, Korea as well, but on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
Right? All of a sudden, the Japanese turned up in Europe and the US with these cars which were good.
Yeah.
And people were like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Japanese, and then now Japanese cars are very well known for great quality, and Korean cars as well.
Yeah.
Great technology, great quality. So, it's inevitable really from China.
It's just the scale. You're absolutely right. It's the scale of it, because however successful a Japanese company was, Japan's quite a small country, and I mean Toyota, an amazing example of all over the world. But what the scale of what's happening in China is what I think is the big challenge. And I think I'm actually meeting a load of people from Audi tomorrow, and I'm not going to be able to hold myself back. I'm going to say, you do know what's going on in China, don't you? Which I'm sure they do. But what are you going to do, guys? Because and also when you look at our viewing figures, although the convertible Wuling Mini EV didn't do as well as other ones, and I think that's probably because it's convertible and people go, I can't,
Yeah, all right, whatever.
Yeah, it rains here all the time. I don't want a convertible. But very often our smaller cars get the most views, and the big expensive SUV. Now that is our specific audience. There's no point trying to cover that up. But there's enormous demand from such a huge range of people who would love to get an electric car but can't afford one, because they are seeing it as, how can I buy an Audi e-tron that's £80,000? Of course you can't. It's crazy. But if there were cheaper, smaller cars that were made in Europe, and the most likely thing is they'll be made in Europe by a Chinese company. It's actually the simple fact of the matter, isn't it? Yeah.
I think I said this on Twitter the other day. I think that Toyota are dithering at the moment.
Yeah.
They haven't got a clear strategy, and I think BYD are about to be probably the next Toyota. They're opening in a new market every single week. Yeah. Last week was, where was it last week? Morocco. The week before was, gosh, I can't remember, but Laos or something, or the week before South America. They're expanding so rapidly this year that they're going to be almost in every market.
And they're putting in like service centres and showrooms and backup support facilities for the cars, not just importing the cars.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. So they're really accelerating towards dominance this year, which they sell sensible normal EVs that hopefully most people can afford.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very aware of the time. I haven't heard your son screaming and hammering on the door, so hopefully he's nodded off.
I just heard him. He's screaming.
Oh, no. Is he?
Yeah, I just heard him.
I think I need to let you go and put him to bed. But it's been amazing talking to you. Thank you so much. And we're always, as always, really looking forward to your next episodes. They're always fabulous. I mean, I sort of feel bad that I don't kind of constantly deluge you with messages going, "This is brilliant, this is the best show we've ever done," But I'm thinking that. I just want you to know we really love them, and everyone they go, "Elliot's done a new," it'll zoom round the company Slack thing. "Elliot's done a new video. Can you download it, Robert?" Because my very fast internet connection, although all our internet connections have got a bit better. But no, it's just what you produce now is amazing. It's just so fascinating. And those little glimpses we get into life in China are always fascinating. It's really, really good stuff. Yeah. It's a great privilege to have you working.
Yeah, and it's great to show that other side of China perhaps we don't always see.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that episode. It's always great talking to Elliot. Great to catch up with him. Just really wish him well. I hope everything is okay there and it's all marvellous and everyone's lovely. That's what it's a pathetic wish, but I cling on to it as hard as I can. Please do the normal stuff, the subscribe, the Patreon link. Have a look at that. Tell your friends and family and an annoying uncle. I think that's always a good idea about the Fully Charged podcast and the Fully Charged show. And please do join us again next time when there'll be another equally amazing guest or guests, plural. But as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.